When it comes to weapons in D&D, not all of them were created equal, and many are considered to be mechanically subpar. On top of this, the rulebooks don't provide us much detail on these weapons, leaving us to fill in the gaps of how our weapons look and feel. Due to this lack of information, I'd like to go through and examine all the weapons of D&D to answer: what is this weapon, both in history and in D&D? How is it different from the other weapons available? And does it need to be made better, and how can we do so? For our next video, let's look at the most important ranged weapon from prehistoric times to the modern age: the shortbow. Before we can truly examine the history of the shortbow, we need to determine what a shortbow is. As with most historical examinations of weaponry, it's important to acknowledge that the weapon categories we use today may not be 100% accurate, but even then, there is no single accepted system of classification for bows. Instead, bows are described by characteristics such as the materials used, the length of the draw, or the shape of the bow. The most common characteristics of a short bow are that they are around 1 meter in length, with a string attached to elastic limbs that use the released kinetic energy to loose an arrow, a fletched projectile with a pointed tip. The oldest known evidence of bow use comes from African sites such as Subudu Cave, where what we believe to be arrowheads have been found dating from approximately 72,000 to 60,000 years ago. Similar archaeological evidence has also been found in Sri Lanka, Germany, Denmark, and southern France. The wide range of discoveries across the world indicates that by the end of the last ice age, bows had replaced spear throwers across every region inhabited by humans, with the exception of Australia, the Americas, and most of Oceania. In the Bronze Age, chariot-borne archers became a defining feature of warfare, from Europe to Eastern Asia and India. With the development of massed infantry tactics, however, and chariots transitioning to shock cavalry and command vehicles, chariot archery fell out of favor. In approximately the same period, mounted archery became a defining feature of Eurasian nomad cultures, and a foundation of their military success. This development of mounted archery also spawned the first composite bows by the 16th century BC, which would spread to and dominate European and Eurasian warfare well into the Middle Ages. In ancient history, many different civilizations fielded large numbers of archers in their armies, many of which wielding the shortbow. In Egypt, Nubian archers were famous for their skill with the bow, causing the land of Nubia to be nicknamed Ta Seti, or Land of the Bow. In India, Vedic hymns emphasized the use of the bow and arrow, with the Dhanur Veda laying out the science of archery and bow warfare. Back west in the Mediterranean, the people of Crete were famed for their excellent archers, causing Cretan mercenaries to be in high demand across Greece and Italy. Further west, the early Romans shunned the use of archers, focusing on their javelin-armed velites as skirmishers during the early Republic. As the empire grew, however, Rome began bringing in more and more auxiliary archers from Gaul and Greece, known as sagittarii. By the start of the medieval period, shortbows were a common sight in both hunting and warfare. Likely the most famous use of shortbows in Europe and Asia, the Mongol armies of Genghis Khan and his successors relied almost exclusively on mounted archers, who used a form of recurve composite bow as their principal weapon. Carrying two bows, Mongol warriors would have a longbow for shooting at range and a short bow for close fighting. These proved very effective against the Western Roman Empire, and further spread the short bow into Europe. This spread was easily seen in the Middle East, where the composite bow was the preferred weapon of the Byzantine and Ottoman empires. One other notable use of the shortbow during this period was at the Battle of Hastings, where Norman archers wounded the Saxon king Harold by firing their arrows over the shields of Saxon forces. Back in Asia, the Zhou dynasty of China valued archery as a virtuous skill for the emperor to have. They also developed a military service examination system with a focus on archery skills, which the Korean Joseon adopted as well, contributing to the development of Korean archery as a practical martial art. With the more frequent adoption of crossbows by the 10th century and the rise of longbows in the 13th and 14th centuries, the shortbow took a backseat in late medieval warfare. Despite the high social status, ongoing utility, and widespread pleasure of archery, almost every culture that gained access to early firearms began using them widely. After the 1503 Battle of Cerignola, where Spain used matchlock arquebuses to defeat the French, the advent of firearms eventually rendered shortbows obsolete in warfare by 1525. This didn't mark the end of the shortbow, however. While disappearing from European battlefields in the gunpowder era, the shortbow continued to be used by indigenous tribes of the Americas and Asia, both for warfare and hunting. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the British initiated a major revival of archery as an upper-class pursuit. With its widespread adoption, as well as the co-option of archery as a uniquely British tradition, recreational bow use soon became extravagant social and ceremonial events for nobility. After the Napoleonic Wars, archery's popularity spread to all social classes, leading to its introduction as a modern sport. Revivals of archery competitions soon sprang up across the world, and by 1972, it even returned to the Olympic Games after being dropped in 1920. While archery remains a popular sport, it's thanks to the efforts of bow hunters like Fred Bear in the 20th century that the shortbow is still seen in hunting to this very day. In D&D, the shortbow is described as a two-handed ranged weapon of the bow family, with the term shortbow generally used to refer to any bow that's not a longbow. Consisting of flexible wood and a strong cord, a shortbow in D&D measures around 1 meter in length and typically weighs around 0.9 kilograms. In previous editions, the shortbow was a martial weapon that would cost between 15 and 30 gold pieces, weighed 0.9 kilograms, and dealt 1d6 piercing damage on a hit. In 5th edition, the shortbow is a simple weapon that costs 25 gold pieces, weighs 0.9 kilograms, deals 1d6 piercing damage, and has the ammunition, range, and two-handed weapon properties. While its movement down to the simple weapons category helps separate it from the longbow, the shortbow is still being overshadowed by its more powerful siblings. When compared to the light crossbow, another simple ranged weapon, the shortbow costs the same amount of gold, deals less damage, shares a range of 80 feet normally and 320 feet at disadvantage, and both weapons require two hands and ammunition to use. The main draw of the shortbow is its ability to be fired quickly with extra attack, not being restricted by the loading property. However, taking the crossbow expert feat, which can be done as early as level 1 with the variant human race, negates this advantage from the shortbow, leaving it better than the sling or dart, but still worse than the light crossbow. Now, there could be times where the shortbow would be a better pick. Maybe your character starts with a different feat instead of crossbow expert, meaning you still have to abide by the loading feature of the light crossbow if you want to make multiple attacks per turn. However, classes that get extra attack also gain an ability score increase before gaining that feature, meaning that any character has the chance to take crossbow expert before they would gain extra attack. Alternatively, maybe your DM doesn't allow feats at all, in which case the shortbow would be a better option than the light crossbow for gameplay above level 5. Is it likely that your DM would do that? Not really, but it is possible, so I wanted to mention it. Outside of that niche case, however, while the shortbow is a good weapon, when looking at it from purely a mechanical standpoint, it's just not as good as the other options. Once again, we're faced with the dilemma of a 5th edition weapon not being bad per se, but not being as good as the other weapons in its category. For characters that want to use the shortbow, they would be purposefully choosing a weapon that's mechanically worse than the other options available to them. So, to fix this, let's look at what fun features we can add to the shortbow to make it stand out as a ranged weapon option in D&D. My first suggestion is to restore the shortbow's improved critical hit effects from 3rd edition. In 3rd edition D&D, the shortbow only dealt 1d6 piercing damage, but when it critically struck, it did triple damage instead of double. This would mean that while the shortbow has a lower damage dice than crossbows, it makes up for that with extra critical damage, granting it a role as a weapon for crit fishing builds. This, in turn, rewards classes that seek out critical strikes or advantage with a weapon that fits their playstyle, such as rogues and rangers. My second suggestion on how to make the shortbow stand out more in D&D is to add more arrows that do different types of damage. As I touched on in the Dart video, 5th edition sorely lacks the ability for martial characters to vary up their damage type. In fact, one of the only raw ways to shoot flaming arrows in D&D is to have a spellcaster use a 3rd level spell slot to enchant up to 12 arrows or bolts. What I propose is adding more arrow options that deal fire, poison, cold, or lightning damage instead of piercing. Now, a vial of poison, which can be used to coat up to 3 pieces of ammo to deal 1d4 extra poison damage, costs 100 gold pieces. I think that's a little steep for just 3 arrows, especially since 20 basic arrows only cost 1 gold piece. For this suggestion, why don't we split the difference and say that a bundle of 20 elemental arrows costs 50 gold pieces. This gives players a gold sink to spend their hard-earned money on, while also bringing ranged martial characters closer in power to spellcasters. Now, the obvious downside to this idea is that it makes spells like flame arrows or lightning arrow useless, which unduly harms rangers more than other classes. But I personally think that adding this level of depth and variety to ranged weapons in D&D is well worth losing a couple 3rd level spells. My third and final suggestion on how to make the shortbow better is to add a weapon feature that makes all ranged attacks while mounted roll at advantage for the shortbow. Historically, the most common use of shortbows in medieval warfare was on horseback, with longbows and crossbows being preferred by infantry units. While mounts are not as common in 5th edition, including a feature like this would not only make the shortbow better on a mount, but also brings it more in line with its historical accuracy. Plus, it may even attract more players to make horse archer characters, using a shortbow to fire volleys of arrows while circling around their foes on regular or even exotic mounts. Now, the alternative to this idea would be to make every other ranged bow weapon roll at disadvantage while mounted, while the shortbow rolls normally, but I think players would prefer to feel rewarded with bonuses rather than penalized for not taking the shortbow specifically. However, these are just my own ideas on how to make the shortbow stand out more as a ranged weapon in D&D. If left as it is now, the shortbow will likely continue to be overlooked due to its lack of mechanical benefits. If we add in some or even all of the suggestions I put forward, we can give players more explicit reasons to use the shortbow specifically, making it a more rewarding and fun option for characters to take over other, more damaging ranged weapons. But with that, we come to the end of today's video on the short bow. An iconic weapon that shaped warfare across the vast majority of human history, the short bow is left lacking with how it's implemented in 5th edition. By emphasizing its strength as a rapid-fire, crit-fishing weapon, we can give players multiple reasons to choose the short bow over other, more damaging weapon options. However, what I want to know is, what do you think of the short bow? Do you like where it's at currently? Do you agree with some of the suggestions I put forward, or do you have your own ideas on how to make it better in D&D? You can let me know down in the comments, or you can discuss it on the Alt-Roll Discord using the link in the description. While on the server, you can view our courses that teach the basics of D&D. If you like what we do, supporting us on our Ko-fi helps keep Alt-Roll operating, and make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to be notified when our videos go live. However, that's all I had for you. Thank you all for watching, make sure to have a great rest of your day, and I'll see all of you next time.